This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1758, Micro Spotlight on Justice League of America, number 183, 184, and 185.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek, uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is.
I'm Adam Murdo.
I am Shane Kelly.
And I'm Chris Eberly. Yes.
Pop, 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 pop.
Doobity-doo-doo-ch-doo-da.
I'm wearing a little Jimmy Durante on it.
It's,
It sounded like.
cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. Everybody wants to get into you. I suppose it all started with the snow.
Okay, I had that on Christmas. I thought of you immediately. We had the Frosty Snowman cartoon on.
My dad used to do that. Cha-cha-cha-cha-cha.
This is a... It's not late enough for us to be loopy, but...
Not at all,
But anyway, welcome. We're bringing you something...
A little bit different. A little bit new.
Something completely different. It's what we sort of on the cuff decided to call a micro spotlight on. It's Chris's idea ultimately on certain key little arcs or brief storylines from comics history. Chris has got some Spider-Man content in mind for this format in the future.
It's in the queue.
But Chris decided to honor Shane and myself here by delving into some classic DC here. And
With Parallel Earths, Mert.
yes,
Yeah.
that's true. That's true. This story that we're going to be talking about in this episode is one of the fabled annual JLA JSA cross Earth team ups that were just such an annual staple of DC storytelling from the Silver Age right on up through about the end of the Bronze Age.
So, would you say about 20 years of this they did this?
Yeah, very nearly. Yeah. From definitely a little more than 20 years. Because this one that we're going to be talking about here occurred in comics cover dated October, November, and December of 1980. So this is the first JLA JSA team up of the 1980s, and one of the last, not the last, not even the second last, but one of the last. That was
my next question. I wasn't sure if this is the last or penultimate or what have you.
Which is almost 40 years ago now.
Actually,
Now, Shem, I know the times are tough, but we're
true.
here to try to
40
relieve some of that burden
years
for you
ago.
for a moment.
for the moment, it's only 39.
That's true. 39 and change.
I chose this, though, because, as Mert mentioned, you guys are both big Justice League fans. Mert loves Parallel Earths. Shane loves crap on a crack when it comes to JLA.
Yep.
And I didn't know, Shane, that you'd never read this.
No,
I'd
no.
never read it either. I knew the significance. I knew the covers, especially the third cover, 185.
Sure.
I'm always a sucker for a dark side story, so I thought it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to check this out. 'Cause it's totally new to me.
It's totally new to all three of us in this discussion, actually.
Oh, I didn't realize you'd never read it either.
I had never read it either. No.
Ah!
I have it here in my Crisis on Multiple Earths Volume 5 trade paperback, and I have not. I haven't read all the stories in there. I have the first 5. I think there's a 6th that I was never able to track down.
I'll have to check. I think I have them all at home. I'll check and see if there are 6.
I kind of think there was, because this only goes. This is the last story in Volume 5, and there were, as we mentioned, a few more after
Yeah,
that. It
yeah.
went all the way up to 1985, the year of Crisis itself, when we had what they
fitting.
called the last JLA JSA story, which was actually a team up between the Detroit era JLA with Vibe and Gypsy and Steel and so forth, and Infinity Inc., who are like the next generation of Earth 2 heroes, the descendants and standard bearers of the JSA. So there were, at least 5 more multiple crossovers of this kind that followed it. So that's certainly enough for one more volume of Crisis on Multiple Earths.
And a reminder, listeners, if you have not checked out the latest installments of the Crisis tapes,
There's a few of them out there that
they
are
are
new for 2019.
master classes, ladies and gentlemen, master classes.
Thank you very much, Chris. And Peter and I do enjoy getting micro level on this subject that is so close
The
to our
word you
hearts as
used, I
fans.
think, was based on Bionic Dave's contribution to the forums was granular,
Yes.
which I appreciate.
Yes, Bionic Dave put it very well.
Yep. Mert, I wanted to ask you as we get started here, if you get a little historical context. The JLA, I knew there were these yearly crossovers. were they often created in terms of it was like a happenstance thing, or they purposely would cross over to meet each other? Like, how did that develop?
Well, it happened different ways each time. I mean, sometimes they would join forces to face some emergent threat. Sometimes the emergent threat came and found them while they were just just having a little family reunion. Because later on in the Bronze Age, after so many crises had brought them together involuntarily, they decided they wanted to get together under happier circumstances and just enjoy each other's company, like have a little barbecue or something. But then inevitably tragedy would strike. And actually, that's the story out of the JLA JSA crossover for 1979, right before the one we're going to talk about in this episode, was of that sort, where the JLA and JSA just got together socially and tragedy struck. That's the story where Mr. Terrific was murdered.
Oh, okay.
It was a whodunit story. It was a locked satellite story where all of the JLAers and JSAers were on the JLA satellite orbiting Earth 1, and they were all trapped there, and it was determined that one of the people aboard had to be responsible
And
for
Mr.
the
Terrific
death.
was not resurrected, I take it.
No, he was not. No, not for quite some time. He was seen in like time travel stories and flashbacks and such, but no, Terry Sloan, the original Mr. Terrific, never did return from the dead, I don't think. But then eventually the Michael Holt character was introduced
Right, of course.
as his legacy. But yes, sometimes it was just a crisis that brought them together. Sometimes they were already together when the crisis struck. And it just so happens that this story is one of those in which the JLA and JSA were about to have their little ambassadorial exchange. Like they decided to do things a little differently and send part of a squad from Earth 2 to Earth 1, and then the JLA were going to send a part of a squad from
And
Earth
I forgot,
1
what
to
was the
Earth 2.
conduit, the means by which they would cross from one Earth to the other?
It's called the Transmatter Cube.
I love it.
There is a volume 6.
Thank you,
Okay.
Shane. I know I've tried to order that from Amazon before and just haven't met with much success.
Try and stock trades?
There's none on there.
Okay.
There's some on eBay that I'm looking at. That's how I confirm. I mean, I'm sure I have it at home, but
By the way, Martin, as part of a Christmas gift to myself, I just ordered from InStock, because I never owned them in my library, Crisis Infinite Earths and then Infinite Crisis.
You've never owned them.
No, I've read them both more than once, but I haven't read either one of them in quite some time. I want to read them back to back,
huh.
and then we can discuss.
Well, it'll be a useful companion volume to what you've been hearing Peter and I talking about.
That was my thinking. So
Yes, and we will eventually extend that to Infinite Crisis, assuming that neither one of us passes away in the meantime, because
well, that's at least
the
10
rate we're
years
going-
away.
Yeah, I know.
Let's
I
hope
know.
that's at least I need no more of that anytime soon.
Yes, yes, amen to that. But we are moving at kind of a
Snail's crawl?
at the pace. Yeah, at the pace of continental drift is what I was going to say. Getting through like one issue of Crisis per year on average, and we're up to issue 5 of 12. Plus, we need to take time to talk about crossovers and just
Stay the
portrayal of
course, my
media,
friend, stay
fan
the
reaction,
course.
and there's all kinds of legacy texts and companion texts that we can.
Sure.
Crisis, the things that have been inspired by Crisis, and Infinite Crisis, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. I spent years gathering all the crossover parts to Crisis on Infinite Earths, and in my usual eccentricities, when they came out with those hardcover 3 volumes, I still ordered them too. I don't get much in the way of collecteds or trades anymore because, to me, I've gotten most of everything I've ever wanted to read.
Right.
But yeah, when they came out, I'm disappointed that they're not organized in reading order. They're just kind of organized strangely to me. But
Yeah, I know what you mean.
yeah,
I remember the solicitations for those things in previews, and I shared your
Yeah.
confusion.
yeah.
Mert, I have to digress for a moment because I've been dying to ask you all evening. How is cinnamon Coca-Cola?
Oh, yes, that's right.
Cinnamon
I
Coca-Cola.
got a bottle of that
And I'm a
sitting
big
here.
Coca-Cola fan. I've
Wow,
never drank
I'm a big
cinnamon
cinnamon
Coca-Cola.
fan.
Yeah, well, I heard a radio ad for it. It's a limited edition batch. See? And they were touting it as Coca-Cola with more of the holidays in it. And I wasn't able to find it anywhere. One of the ladies who works with me at the Christmas barn saw it randomly at the dollar store, I think she said,
Yeah,
or maybe
wow.
CVS, and she just bought 2 bottles and brought them in for me.
Huh.
And, Chris, shortly before I took my fateful first sip, it occurred to me that, maybe all they did to make this taste like cinnamon was add whatever chemicals they used to flavor cinnamon-flavored mouthwash. And
that's
as a
what they did,
result
huh?
of that, perhaps it's just the power of suggestion, but now when I drink it, all I can think of is Coke plus mouthwash.
That does not sound
Oh.
appetizing at all.
Now, I went to this is total digression, but I went to a bar that's up the road from here a little bit the other night, and I had this before. I like rum and coke, and they don't have the normal name brands of things there. It's more of a indie kind of beer place, microbrew stuff, but they had rum and coke, spiced rum and coke. So I'm thinking, well, they got to at least have Captain Morgan's to put the spiced rum in it. Well, it's not. It's something else, and I can taste cinnamon in it. It tastes really good. But my love of cinnamon comes through in that drink, so I'm like, oh. I heard about that, but I haven't seen it. But if you're saying it tastes like mouthwash,
well, I may have just convinced myself that it tastes that way, Shane. That's the thing. It's maybe not fair to the brand. So if you do get a chance, try it for yourself.
Okay.
And just don't think about what I've said here today.
Fantastic.
Yes. In fact, let's not think about that anymore at all right now. Let's think instead about Justice League of America in 1980.
Crisis on New Genesis.
And Durante again. Let me tell you, I was really intrigued to read this because comics written in this time period, DC Comics especially, have a certain style.
Yes, they do.
And a certain tone, which I remember as a kid. When I was a kid, I was a Marvel reader. I didn't read much DC. I eventually realized, well, DC's just as good, and I started to read like the biggie, like Dark Knight and Year One, down the list. But I tended to stay away from the monthly DC comics, in part thinking back to when I was a kid, because I just preferred the Marvel sort of let's call it writing style compared to the DC writing style. And I'm being very general here, but so reading these stories, I remember I was thinking to myself, all right, am I going to find this like a slog, or is it going to be something refreshing to me? And it was a bit of both as I read through this. Ultimately, I really enjoyed the story. And Jerry Conway's always been one of my favorite writers.
Sure.
But what's interesting is the way he writes Spider-Man is very different than the way he's writing this story.
Oh, yes.
And granted, it's a big cosmic team-up, and there's a lot of characters, a lot of moving parts. But by the end of it, I read it last night and this morning, I came away like, I'm really glad I read this. I'm glad, I selected this. Would I read it again? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I still enjoyed it. So just my initial opening thoughts on that.
In some ways, it's what I expected it to be in some of its over-explanation of things as the issues went on. Like, I didn't need to hear who every character was every single issue, but that's the way it was back then.
For the reader, though.
Yeah,
right?
that's absolutely right. So, we have the luxury of reading them all at one time or with some perspective now, but, back then, the internet was not there. You had to remind everybody every time.
Yep.
Who what?
Somebody's comic could always be their first comic.
Absolutely.
That was one of
Absolutely.
the golden rules.
And things weren't traded like they are these days.
Not at all.
Absolutely not.
So I have this in the single issues. I have this in the Crisis on Multiple Earths trade, as Adam does, but I ended up reading them on my iPad from the DC app.
Yeah, I read them on Comixology.
Yeah, and what's that volume that you brought with you today,
So,
Shane?
and I have 2 issues. So
Yeah, just 2 of the 3, right?
2 of the 3, because back, see if I can find it real quick. Back in 2009, DC was trying something with this DC Comics Classics
Those were expensive.
Library.
I remember that when I was
They're
retailing.
very
It was very
expensive.
expensive. I did not order them.
This was volume 1 and 2. There was 1 and 2 of George Perez's work on Justice League, and the Justice. I mean, you see how thin this volume is. It was cover price $40.
Yeah, they're
it's
really
outrageously
expensive.
overpriced. So I ordered the first one. I think I acquired the second one. If my memory serves, it could be failing, but at a con for like $10 or something. But this one I did order, and oddly enough, not thinking much about it, there's a forward on here where George Perez discusses how he wanted to work for DC and do Justice League, and Dick Dillon was doing it, and there was just no chance of that happening. And then, unfortunately, Dick Dillon passed away of a heart attack and gave George Perez a chance. Well, that happened between part 1 and part 2 of this storyline. So this volume of DC Classics Library Justice League with George Perez starts with issue 2, the second part of the story, because George Perez had nothing to do with the first part. So that's a little strange for a format, but I understand why it's in here. And there's a very nice forward in here that George Perez wrote explaining his love of Justice League and where he was doing Titans already and how he wanted to do Justice League and how he got to do it. So if you ever get the chance to read that forward, I'm sure it's posted online somewhere. Somebody's got to have it copied and up there. But it's a very interesting read for that part of it, which is why I brought it to bring that up. It's neat to read how he got the job. Sad as it was, it's still an interesting way to collect this format together.
Well,
back
we were
then.
talking before we went on the air that Dylan had been drawing Justice League for
years,
right?
12
Yeah.
years.
And he was poised to do it for many years more. Jerry Conway had scripts in the bucket for him to do going forward for many
Yeah,
issues ahead.
It was an unusually long run for a creator,
Yeah.
even in those days.
Yeah.
It would be kind of unheard of in this day and age.
Yeah, and unfortunately had a heart attack, so never a good thing. But
Yep, he was a real kind of an unsung hero and a real dependable workhorse for DC.
well, and in that first issue here, I know we'll talk about it, but to me, very Kirby-esque in his drawing of the New Gods and some things surrounding New Genesis, Apocalypse, and all that. Yeah, I really liked it.
Yep, let me read what it says about Mr. Dillon in
Please.
my
Sure, go
Crisis on Multiple Earths trade. Dick Dillon was born in Watertown, New York in 1929. After graduating from Syracuse University, he spent some years in the field of commercial illustration before embarking on a career in comics. Best remembered for his almost 12-year-long run on JLA, Dillon also had a decades-long association with the character Black Hawk at both Quality Comics and DC. It can safely be said that during the 60s and 70s, there was not a single DCU character that the prolific artist didn't draw at one time or another.
That's awesome.
Dillon passed away in 1980.
That's awesome. That he got to draw that many characters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's part of why I love Justice League of America, Justice League, whatever you want to call it, so much, is because almost every DC character has been in the Justice League at some
Right,
point.
it's the convergence, the point of convergence for so much of the assembled universe of the body of the whole character library converges on the Justice League.
Yep.
It's
It's fantastic.
the place for characters to see and be seen.
Yep.
So, Murd, as you read this for the first time, and since you're have such a love for the parallel worlds and all of that, how did these issues strike you? Did you find yourself really enjoying them? Did you find it was a bit of a slog, or?
It was somewhere in between the two
Okay.
poles.
Same for me then.
It did feel a little bit like a slog at points.
Yeah.
The involvement of the two teams from Earth 1 and Earth 2 was kind of overshadowed by the setting and the fact and the whole fourth world element of the New Gods. It was really more a New Gods story.
Yes, absolutely.
Even though the New Gods were mostly they weren't seen very much,
No.
except for a few of them, like Orion and Highfather and Mr. Miracle and Big Barda.
Granny.
But yeah, it was more a story having to do with the New Gods and their world than it was a story about the Justice League and the Justice Society. And it seemed to me it was Jerry Conway revisiting his revamp of Kirby's Fourth World New Gods saga, which he had done just a couple of years earlier at DC. Because we've got these characters in their redesigned costumes. Orion is in the
That struck me. I didn't realize Orion wasn't wearing his helmet at this point.
Yeah,
that was jarring for me.
That threw me off a little bit too. I wasn't sure who he was at first.
I didn't know who he was initially.
the half cowl and the big letter O on his chest. Yeah,
I was
that's
thinking Light Ray, but I'm like, well, that's not right either. And then somebody finally said Orion.
yeah. That's the Orion and a few of the other characters were redesigned by artist Don Newton when he and Jerry Conway brought these characters continued their adventures post Kirby. Which didn't sit well with a lot of Kirby buffs. Like some of them disliked that run of New God stories so much that they tried to punt it off into a parallel universe or something. Kind of like the Earth B concept. The difficulty being, as is set forth by Conway in this story, New Genesis and Apocalypse exist in a place outside of time and space, and so are not really a part of the multiversal structure of DC continuity as it existed back then. So
That reminds me. In Crisis, do the New Gods appear? I forgot.
Darkseid at least does play.
He does,
A fairly.
okay.
He has a small but prominent role to play.
Okay.
Like the characters actually do go to seek some aid from him near the end of the story.
Okay.
Yeah. So the fourth world elements are mentioned, but the New Gods as a whole don't really play an important part. Darkseid has his moment, but that's about it.
So, because this is what really struck me reading through, and I love the time capsule element. So we're reading comics from 40 years ago. Okay, and the style, everything is so different than what we're accustomed to today. And did you find that took you out of the story a bit, or did you just relish the nostalgia?
I relished in the nostalgia.
As did I. Yeah.
Ditto.
Yeah. I mean, the captions, the heavy dialogue, the explanation. I mean, you don't really see comics rendered this way today when it comes to the writing style, but I ate it up. Because when I grew up, this is what a lot of was reading. Although, as I mentioned earlier, Marvel Comics had a different tone than DC superhero comics, based on my memories when I was a kid in this time period.
I didn't read much in the way of Marvel back then, but from just what I know, I would say they were more grounded in reality and a little bit heavier of topics. These were quite a bit more fantastical.
The fact that you can get that word in at least one time each episode is so.
I try.
I just feel like I'm wearing like a nice comfy blanket right now. Like
It's a great word to describe superhero comics as a whole. So
Yeah.
it's,
God, that was reassuring and comforting. Thanks, Shane. Well, when I think of the Marvel books that I was reading then, because I said in the earlier episode, I was reading far more Marvel than DC. There was that shtick, that more conversational element, the talking sort of more to the audience. The dialogue definitely had a different feel to it. Now, granted, to be fair, this is a massive, it's 3 issues, but there's all these characters. There's so much going on. And it's interesting how Conway stuck. I'm so used to the way Conway would write Marvel comics. It's different here. Although Firestorm had a bit of that irreverence to him in this story, I thought.
well, yeah, he was kind of built to be
Yeah.
DC's 1970s Peter Parker.
Right.
And I think in that George Perez library edition, I think his foreword mentions about how Jerry Conway was trying to bring some of that Marvel writing process into the DC to how it's structured, but I don't know how far along it really got to it.
Additional attention to continuity
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
uniform world building.
Yep.
So, just starting with sort of our opening thoughts, like what did you guys think of this? Because we've all read this, all of us reading this for the first time, which I didn't realize, which is great. So,
I kind of expected it to be a little bit more mature, wordier, but I didn't find it that way. I agree with what Adam and you said. It's kind of in the middle. There were some parts that kind of drug on, but overall, I really enjoyed it. It was fun to read. As I'm reading any of the DC characters, mostly the Justice League members, I'm hearing the Super Friends voice actors in my head for Superman, for Wonder Woman, for Batman.
Oh,
Not at all inappropriate.
Yeah.
you're hearing the old Batman.
Oh, yeah.
old man voice. Okay.
Yeah.
It's, Olan Soleil, I think his name
Yep.
was.
Yep, who had one little bit part in the '60s Batman TV show. He was a news announcer.
Really?
For one episode, yeah. I'm pretty sure. Sidebar.
Fantastic sidebar. The Super Friends, I think that's a great reference because it definitely has that feel. Now, granted, you have a lot more characters like Power Girl and Dr. Fate and so forth. But there was, and I enjoyed that the big team up and the cosmic stakes, and this was just fun. Like I thoroughly enjoyed the ride this took me on. And as I said, because of the way I'm accustomed to reading comics now, this is not a story I'd probably return to often and read again, if at all, as I mentioned earlier. But it was wonderful to sort of jump into a period of time in comics scripting and just plot devices you really don't see anymore, or at least the way they're doing it then.
And especially for something that was so annual, so monumental to happen every year, that I feel like everybody would have looked forward to. Oh, here comes the JLA JSA team up. Here comes the crossover with the Crisis Worlds, or however you put it. I can't imagine this wasn't exciting.
It's like I used to
as
look
it
forward
came
to
out.
annuals when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Now we're starting to reminisce and
Yeah.
think about how old we're becoming. Mert, I wanted to ask you, so we have Huntress, and you were talking about Huntress in some of your recent Crisis episodes. So this is the daughter of Bruce Wayne from Earth 2, and he's dead, correct?
That
at
is
this point?
completely correct,
Okay.
yes.
So she sees Bruce Wayne of Earth 1 as like an uncle figure, basically? Is that...
Yeah. There's actually a fairly touching scene in the previous year's crossover, the one where Mr. Terrific dies. That took place just a few months after the death of Earth 2 Batman story had happened in 1979. And so she's talking to her Uncle Bruce about the death of his Earth 2 self.
And in what issue did the Bruce Wayne Earth 2 die? So they actually showed that, because I haven't read that.
Oh, yeah. It was a
Okay.
2-part story in the Justice Society strip in Adventure Comics.
Okay.
And I can't give you an issue number, I'm afraid, because I'm bad about that.
Yeah, some of the forums can help us out with that. Now, as you mentioned, Shane, we go from the Dick Dillon art in the first issue, and I love the splash page with the title "Where Have All the New Gods Gone?" And you're right about the Kirby. I mean, that could be Asgard, basically.
Yeah.
Definitely, and trying to capture that feel. We should remember that when Kirby brought the new gods into DC in the early '70s, the early Bronze Age, what a big deal it was. I mean, they were promoting Kirby is here. Like, it was such a big deal, like, that they got Kirby and he was doing his own concepts, free of the fetters of Marvel editorial that he was wanted to get away from, and so forth. And of course, by this point, Kirby's no longer with DC, and he's no longer working on these characters. And as Murd mentioned, they were taking them in a different direction. Costumes, again, Orion, I really found jarring. I had no idea. I was ignorant that they had so dramatically changed the way he looked. I don't know why he would, because I thought Kirby's design was phenomenal. But
And I didn't realize the influence a Mother Box had on Orion to disguise him, so to speak.
Well, disguise isn't quite the right word either. It's to, just to diminish the influence of Darkseid on him.
Okay.
Just to remake him in his his preferred self-image.
Okay.
Just to less the hideous berserker, the berserker brute that was the son of Darkseid, and more to give him a likeness that's more in keeping with how he views himself.
Okay.
The improved self-image that his upbringing on New Genesis gave him.
Okay.
Darkseid.
Good to know.
That's right. Just keep doing that repeatedly throughout the episode, Chris.
I shan't, but I couldn't help myself. I have to.
You should, really.
No, I have to. This issue reminded me that I have to order and get Tom King's Mr. Miracle, the miniseries he did, which I read, but I want to get in one volume, because I love that, and I really want to read that again after reading something like this from so many years ago, to kind of as a contrast with how they're used Darkseid and Mr. Miracle.
And he just kept randomly inserting black panels with the words Darkseid is in them over and over and over again, just to create that sense of impending dread.
One thing I've found in this, like, when I think about Darkseid, I think of a villain of such cosmic stakes. Like, there's very few beings or villains on his level in terms of superhero comics, and I didn't get that sense of Darkseid in this story. He felt like more of a run-of-the-mill.
This is that one time that this cosmic god of evil needed the fiddler, the shade, and the icicle to bring him back from the dead.
So, Shane, how'd you feel seeing the Shade? Not the shade of Starman.
Well, no, but
Crisis Shade.
Yeah, definitely a different kind of shade, and it's fine. It's what I expect from the character. It's what I remember of him before he became an anti-hero, whatever, in Starman.
Before James Robinson.
Yeah,
he really was single-handedly responsible for the elevation
changing
of that character.
Yeah, just more of a run-of-the-mill.
That was a fun but dopey element of the story, like the fiddler,
Well, okay, all right. I was good.
And he was able to beat Orion and Power Girl, just by sawing away on his fiddle.
But I don't want to forget. So, as I read the story, it's fine and I'm enjoying it. But if Metron interfered in the beginning like he did at the end, the whole 3 issues is useless.
Now, Shane. Come on, there's no story.
Okay, just putting that out there. Kind of everything got fixed because Metron interfered.
He had to keep that Deus in his machina until the correct moment.
Till the end, yeah.
But that struck me, and it was fun because you have these these are dopey elements because when I think of the new gods, I think of the Kirby stuff, which is epic, and then I think of how the new gods were used much later on.
Yeah.
What was the story that Jeff Johns did with JLA versus was it Justice League versus Darkseid?
The Darkseid War.
Darkseid War. I think of stories like that, and when you think of the power of Darkseid is.
Yeah.
And I think Jeff Johns was remembering that moment in Crisis that I mentioned, that when Darkseid was consulted to help stave off the Anti-Monitor.
Yeah.
And that story really established a deeper connection between the Anti-Monitor and Darkseid.
And yet some of them are throttled by a fiddle and some ice. Yeah. Okay.
But again, there was a charm to it that I
Yeah.
really enjoy because it's a book of that time where you're going to see those types of plot devices and and what was interesting is that these are such low tier villains that they brought in to help. Like, couldn't he have gotten some of the big guns?
Yeah.
That just struck me as
Well, we're going to
as
pull some villains from
fun.
the Earth we're going to destroy,
Yeah.
and it's going to be these 2-bit hussies. Let's go.
Now the
Hustlers.
Shade is a Golden Age character, correct?
Yes, all three of them are.
Okay. That's
And
what I
to
thought.
me, the Shade is the more powerful of all of them. I mean, he
well,
does have
you're
some-
still thinking of in terms of
Yeah.
what Robinson did to
Yeah.
his power
Yeah.
set. At this point,
this
he was
point-
just able to create darkness.
Okay.
That it wasn't.
That's true.
He couldn't summon shadow phase or
Another
demons or
dimension, sort of.
no. He couldn't create solid darkness. It was just regular darkness.
And who was he a rogue for originally in the Golden Age?
He was a villain for the Golden Age Flash,
Okay.
as was the Fiddler. Although the Icicle, I believe, was a Green Lantern villain.
Ready? Hold on. Click. Out go the
Yeah.
lights. Click. Out go the lights. Click. Out go the lights.
It's they're two of the three of them were the bad guys who were featured in the Flash number 123.
Okay.
The Flash of Two Worlds story that introduced the whole Earth 1, Earth 2 concept. It was the Shade, the Fiddler, and the Thinker. They were the ones that Barry and Jay needed to take down. The Icicle is brought in here from elsewhere. And at this point, I don't think. Yeah, this is pre-Infinity Inc. So the revamped Injustice Unlimited had not yet been introduced.
And they're all villains of the Justice Society at this point from Earth 2.
Well, yeah, they're Earth 2 villains, and then they had been. Actually, I'm not sure if how many of them had actually been members of the original Injustice Society. Actually, because the Injustice Society was a Golden Age concept also, but it was like Vandal Savage. The Gambler was in there. The Perdegaton. I'm not sure. I don't remember how many of the three villains we're seeing here, Fiddler, Shade, and Icicle, were actually a part of that group in the Golden Age. Brainwave was in there. But yeah, I don't remember the Fiddler, for example, being an original member of that group.
Okay.
What do we think of the heroes they chose from the two squads for the adventure?
Interesting assortment.
Yeah.
Yeah, for those who haven't read the story, we're looking at, from the Justice League, the Earth 1 versions of Batman and Superman and the Hal Jordan Green Lantern, plus Firestorm. And it's natural that Conway would throw him in there, because he's always a good POV character, since he's relatively new to all this superheroics. He was only a 2-year-old character at this point, plus Conway had co-created him. Then from Earth 2, we had a lot of female characters. We had the Earth 2 Wonder Woman, the second-generation heroes Power Girl and the Huntress, and Dr. Fate.
I thought it was an interesting mix. Did they show the Superman from Earth 2 briefly in the beginning? I feel like they did. Didn't they?
It was.
Yeah.
If it was in that first panel.
Yes, they did.
when
There
they're
it
waiting
is.
to
Yeah.
transport
Okay.
across the dimensions.
Yep,
He doesn't have great temples, though, right?
You can't
Can't
tell
tell-
from
can't
that
tell,
angle,
okay.
but you can tell that he's got a different and cruder-looking
Yes.
S shield on his
Yes.
chest.
Yeah, it actually kind of looks sideways.
And the Wonder Woman from Earth 2, is that Hippolyta?
No.
It's not. Okay, I wasn't
That's-
sure about that.
That's Hippolyta as a Golden Age Wonder Woman is a much later retcon.
Okay,
We're
that's what I
talking
thought.
Like
All right.
John Byrne's run on the character in the 90s.
So this is just Diana from...
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Just Princess Diana from the Earth 2 universe.
Okay. I was wondering that too.
Yeah, I'm looking at as I go through the first issue, 183. Orion is really jarring for me. Like, I mean, to me, the outfit is terribly goofy. And I like Shane said, I had no idea that was him until they established that.
Until somebody said it.
I think one of the things that struck me about, I'm so used to Kirby rendering the New Gods characters, or them having this epic scope to them. And I obviously I didn't feel that to the same. Not that it was a negative, but I just didn't feel that to the same degree in reading this story. Although I really liked how they used Big Barda in the story when they go into Granny Goodness's stronghold, And I thought that's one of the most compelling parts of the whole three issues. Is
Ooh, yes, that one panel where it's just Granny and Barda face to face, and Barda just kind of sneers at Granny, and the reader is left to wonder
know what's going to happen there.
Yes.
And Granny's like, "Oh, I forgot you knew all these passages too," or something like that. And like, "Oh, she's going to kill her."
Well, and I have such a hard time hearing any other voice for Granny Goodness other than Ed Asner. It comes through every time.
Ed Asner.
Ed
yeah.
Asner in Superman the Animated
Yep,
Series,
it
late
was-
90s.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Okay. He did the voice of Granny Goodness?
Yeah, he
sure
did.
did.
Yep.
Wow.
Yes, and
I
I
gotta
agree.
go back and watch that.
I agree with Shane.
It's hard not to get that out of your
Was it a
head.
compelling performance or was it silly?
No, it wasn't silly.
Okay.
It sounded a little odd, but it was a good performance.
See,
I
I'm
just
thinking,
thought.
I just watched as a now I've just lost the ability to speak. Digression. I just watched the first time Elf a few nights ago with my parents.
You've never seen it
I've-
before?
I've never seen it.
I saw it in the
Asner
theater.
Santa.
Every single year, 3 or 4 years now, I try to watch that movie. I can't get past the first 20 minutes.
Ed Asner's played Santa a bunch of times.
Has he
actually.
really?
Goes
Okay.
On camera and in animation.
So I just remember that. So what I also really enjoyed as I looked through these first couple issues is I love the Mr. Miracle Batman team up. I thought that worked really well in the story because they're taking their skill sets so complementary. And Huntress was there as well.
They've been called like the two greatest escape artists on Earth. Bruce
And
Wayne
that
and
was-
Scott Free.
And
That
I
was
know
really
that
well
they
done.
didn't intend it this way, but I like, from my perspective, that they team up later in Justice League, back in 86. And
Right,
whatnot.
right. This is the first time that Mr. Miracle and Big Barda
Yeah,
get a chance to team up with the League.
Yep.
And when Big Barda goes, they go into Granny Goodness' stronghold. Granted, it's in 1980, so they can't get into too much of the sort of aspects, but what the children are suffering and like that one character, I think her name was Crimson, and how she's so traumatized, and Wonder Woman has to explain to her what love is.
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the most compelling parts of the whole arc because
Well, and even though this is the 80s, I'm kind of surprised for visually how they showed.
the children in chains and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah, especially in the classroom in the later issues, all like 20, 30 of them all chained together.
Well, you got to
all
remember,
classroom.
we didn't have the sensitivities that we might have today in popular culture.
you're right.
I mean, I always go back to, and I talked about this when we did our Marvel Monster Spotlight many years ago, the issue of Man-Thing where they have this tormented clown shoot himself. And then they made it into a power record. And they didn't take out that the clown commits suicide. So,
Wow.
yeah,
we really weren't shielding children
Yeah,
quite
no.
as much from that kind of thing in those days, were we?
So in that sense, Shannon, I'm not surprised. But the notion that like the totalitarian images like Granny loves you and the whole Orwellian approach to that, which is so in keeping with the whole, Kirby was so astute when it came to the dangers of fascism, and he was always interested in anti-life, all those concepts, and taking back to his own experiences in World War II and living in America and going through all of that. And it so permeates these stories, and I'm pleased when other creators tap into that and bring that in, which they did. Because the Granny Goodness character is horrifying. I mean, it's a horrifying character.
When you talk about Darkseid and his quest for the anti-life equation,
Darkseid is
the only thing I always, well, not the only thing, but one of the things that pops in my head is I feel like it's the recurring character, the villain in Days of Our Lives, Stefano,
Wow.
whatever.
That's a reference I was not expecting.
Yeah. It's my mom used to watch it, and it's just he goes after the same stuff over and over and over, and beats a dead horse with it, and that's how I feel. Darkseid is always just the anti-life equation, over and over. It's just random.
What did we think of the transition from Dylan's art to Perez?
It's a little jarring because it's so different.
Yeah.
But
It's
I
the same
love-
inker. It was the same inker.
Yes, and a fairly heavy-handed inker at that, Frank McLaughlin.
Yeah. I love Perez's work, but it is very jarring between the two. And something I think in that foreword that I mentioned, Jerry Conway's writing to Dick Dillon's strengths, not George Perez's, because these scripts are already well in the bucket. So, George Perez has to do with what he can to make the story make sense from his perspective, but it's not written to his strengths in drawing per his words.
A
So.
fair point. Yeah, and I did get the feeling that Perez probably skewed his style a bit, just to
Probably,
make it
yeah.
less jarring, just
Yeah.
to make it a little more like what Dylan would have turned in. And those those heavy inks of Frank McLaughlin helped to mortar over the transition a bit too. Because, yeah, honestly, I'm finding I'm not much of a fan of McLaughlin's inking. It makes this whole story, to me, seem a bit like a special advertising section for action figures. I mean, it looks, for lack of a better word, cheap.
I mean, I concur. I mean, I love Perez's art in general, but I don't think he was well served by the ink here. I mean, again, Perez could I'll go back to Shane's title phrase, put crap on a cracker, and I'd probably find something good about it. And certainly, this is not crap on a cracker by any stretch. I don't mean to imply that at all, but and again, I really respect what Dick Dillon did throughout his career. It's an interesting contrast.
Yeah.
Like when I look looking at Perez's art, like the way he draws the fiddler is so different than the way Dillon rendered the character. And I actually find the fiddler a little more menacing when Perez renders him, even though it's he's ultimately a really goofy character. But and of course Perez's page layout. If you look on page 7 in issue 184, and Perez uses the musical notes as a frame. That's again, it's Perez, right?
Yeah.
There's
It is.
great framing devices to
Sure.
really draw the reader in, and it's very compelling. And God, I wish Peter here were here.
Yeah,
to
on
sound
the
off
next
this.
page, the fiddler looks a little bit more dastardly.
Yes.
In that panel.
Yeah. What did we think of? Do we think Conway captured the characters' distinct voices well, or do you think that was lost to some degree because there's so much going on?
He did a better job on some characters than others.
I mean, Firestorm, because its co-creation was very distinct.
Yeah,
and-
Yeah.
It would be difficult for Conway to get Firestorm's voice wrong because he gave the character the voice in the first place.
I think between Firestorm, Batman, Mr. Miracle, Huntress, I think they all were very well serviced.
What I found interesting, I agree with that, Shane, was when Hal Jordan has that moment where he feels like he's failed the High Father, and he's reminded of his relationship with the Guardians, and he starts talking about. Yeah. That was. I don't know if that scene worked necessarily, because I think of Hal as a man of action, and he just kind of like sits down and he starts to sort of go on the soliloquy about. What did you think about that, Murd?
Well, I agree with you. It was an affecting, powerful scene.
Yeah, it
and
struck
I also
me.
agree that I'm not sure that it worked.
Yeah.
Because, it's not quite Hal's personality. It's not so much like him to sit there and. I can understand him having a special feeling for father figures, but probably more because of his own father than because of the Guardians of the Universe, with whom he is quite often, even as of 1980, not always gotten along. Like he's had his,
And that's noted in his as he's talking about that.
yeah, they've aided me, punished me, and helped me become a man. I don't think he really felt, as of 1980, all that grateful towards the Guardians
And
for the role that they've had in his life as a superhero.
It seemed a little jarring because I get where it's talking about the agony he's seeing High Father in, but there's nothing really to remind him of a Guardian or the Corps. It's not like he's a blue new god being. It just seemed a little bit out of place to me to lament like that
If
in the
this
middle of
story
action.
had been written a couple of decades later by Jeff
Yeah.
Johns, we would have gotten a ton of parallels drawn between Highfather and Martin Jordan, Hal Jordan's actual father.
Just
but the Guardian thing, I
Seemed
didn't
odd.
buy.
No.
What I thought was very much in character, that was Superman trying to tell Crimson the children, you can't take life.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
that was right on the money.
Yep.
Yeah, because him and Wonder Woman were like, what do you mean? You can't just kill them. No.
Yep, and I'm glad it was the Earth 2 Wonder Woman that came along in this adventure, too. Because
Why is that?
She has to explain, because there are certain things that she's encountering on this highly symbolic, Kirby created realm of apocalypse, this spatial Manichaean dystopia of New Genesis and Apocalypse that tie into the often symbolically or allegorically expressed ethos of William Moulton Marston, the creator of Wonder Woman. And then since this is Earth 2 we're talking about, it's very much his and Harry G. Peters' version of Wonder Woman that's being brought to life here. And it's fitting that she should be the one who should encounter something like Granny Goodness's orphanage prison, and that she should be the one to explain the meaning of love to Little Crimson, because that philosophy, that ideology of Marston's, had very much to do with the power of love and loving submission to authority. What Granny Goodness is
He was
peddling
definitely
here.
into submission too.
Yeah, he was. Yes, to the level of fetishism, in fact. Many of the stories that he wrote about the Golden Age Wonder Woman involved bondage in some way. In fact, that's one of her chief weaknesses, was that she would lose most of her power if her bracelets, her wristlets were chained together by a man. So what Granny Goodness is doing on Apocalypse is kind of a warped reflection of this loving submission to authority that Wonder Woman was always so much
Bird,
about.
nicely done.
So it's kind of cool that she's the one that got to set Crimson straight as to what love was, and how Granny Goodness had given her such a terribly wrong idea.
What? I'm sorry, Shane. Go ahead.
I'm just looking at the first page in issue 185. I love the way Perez drew Metron and that cosmic stuff all in the background. To me, that is a very Kirby-esque page.
The opening sequence where
Yeah.
the Mobius chair is flying through
Through the
boom tube, and get to see these.
all the lines intersect, all the different colored.
It's exposition, but you're right. It is Kirby-esque exposition.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm looking at the issue 185 as well, Shane. Where the story fell a little flat for me. When I think of the High Father and Darkseid, I think of beings that are really almost beyond our comprehension, and they seem very pedestrian in this story. The High Father, he's trapped and they free him, and he's weak, and Darkseid with the weird, I need the fiddler to help me,
Well,
restore myself.
On the other side of that is what you just said about High Father.
Yeah.
It's a little disappointing. He needed Earthlings to come and rescue him.
Yeah.
So when I think of the new gods, and again, this is just my own take based on the stories I've read over the years. That's again, as much as I enjoyed this, that took me out of it a little bit, because that just didn't jive with me with how those characters were portrayed by Kirby in the 70s, and then later on again it's a different time period.
It jives a bit more closely with what Conway was doing with them a couple of years
which
earlier.
I understand.
Yes, and this whole story, this 3-issue story we're talking about here, is another one of those. It was kind of tossed on the junk heap by certain Kirby aficionados, just banished it from their headcanon. Exactly.
I never go along with that, because I always feel like a really good writer, a really skilled writer, can find a way to make everything in the history work.
Well, yeah,
And,
it could be made to work. It's just that these Kirby fans of which I speak didn't want it to.
Which I understand
Didn't
that
like
as well.
these stories and just didn't want them to have been produced in the first place.
Yeah, I'm looking on page 18 of issue 185. Going somewhere, Granny? Barda, I forgot. I can't do Ed Asner. Sorry, Shane. You knew these passages too, and the look on her face. That's one of my favorite panels in the whole story.
Yeah.
Because
No dialogue at all. Just a sneer.
And when we think about Big Barda as the warrior, and I go back to I love the way she's portrayed in the Tom King story that he did just recently, Mr. Miracle. See, my attitude is, she's going to kill her, and she should,
Or at least beat the pulp out of her.
but that's not going to happen in a 1980 DC superhero comic. But I like, as Murd said, it leaves it to your imagination what's going to happen there. Another scene I really enjoyed was when Batman and Mr. Miracle are trying to break into one aspect of the stronghold, and they're trying to deal with the traps, and great Perez art when Scott gets the trap around his neck, and he and Batman are discussing how they can break in.
It's on page 21 when they kind of come to the same conclusion about how to get around
Or is it?
the traps. Yeah. I like that. Kind of playing to their strengths as what Adam, I think, said before about being the greatest detectives on their respective worlds.
I was also surprised you
escape
barely
artists,
saw.
escape artists, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Shane. I was also surprised you barely saw parademons in this. They appear only at the end.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
just have sort of like humanoid soldiers, and I'm always used to the because the parademons are such grotesque concepts.
And
they're
I
just
like
infinite,
the two versions of them,
Yeah.
the red and the green.
but they pop up a little bit there in the climactic battle.
Yep. Hard to recognize as parademons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But again, as I look at these last elements in the final issue, I'm really struck by the way Darkseid is portrayed. It just, and I mean, granted, it's never easy to beat him, but I'd say this is one of the easier times heroes had of defeating Darkseid.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, that panel where Firestorm sends the Omega effect back at him by
Through
creating
the funnel.
Yeah.
It's great.
creating a little bent tube in midair with his powers.
Thinking, well, hell, if Firestorm could do that back then, let's do that every time. Boy, that'd be easy.
Why not just throw a pie in his face while you're at it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, we're going
yeah.
against Darkseid. Come on, Firestorm, let's get that tube going.
Yeah, that again, I that's my own prejudice because I have a certain view of Darkseid in my head.
Well,
when I
yeah,
think of certain
it's
stories. That's why they're so interesting.
universally menacing
Yeah.
on a cosmic level to shatter worlds and universes. Not, I don't know, not the simplicity of what this.
But
seems.
it didn't ruin the story for me.
No, it
It added to its charm for me in a state because I'm just thinking about the time when this was done. But I can see, as Merv was saying, how certain Kirby enthusiasts would be kind of turned off by all this.
Going with my theme of who I hear in my head, I could not hear Michael Ironside voicing this Darkseid.
No, no, not at all.
It would probably be more the Frank Welker
Yeah,
of the Superpowers show.
yeah.
God, I haven't seen that in so many years. Oh,
The Superpowers team.
Mert.
At least he's not hitting on Earth 2 Wonder Woman.
Did that happen in that cartoon?
He kind of had a crush
Oh, I
on
don't
Wonder
remember
Woman
that. Okay.
in that version of of the Super Friends.
And then, as you mentioned, Shane, at the very end, you really see like Light Ray and some of the other characters because they're all been freed from the thrall of the hypnosis they were under. So, what is sort of our overall take on this? And since none of us had read it before, which is just great serendipity, but
I enjoyed it. It was fun. Like you, I don't know that I'd go back and reread this like I reread. Oh God, what the heck is it? It's blanking in my head. One of Morrison's more popular.
Oh, wow, like Crisis Time. Oh, Rock of Ages?
Rock of Ages.
Rock
Thank
of
you.
Ages.
Yeah, God, I can't even believe I couldn't remember that.
Yeah, that thing that I read over and over.
yeah,
and
yeah.
I don't remember.
I don't remember what it's called. Yeah, I wouldn't go back and reread this like Rock of Ages, but it was still enjoyable.
Yeah, if you're a crisisologist, you
Yeah.
should really read it at least once. You should read all these classical
yeah.
stories at least once. But yeah, this is one of the cross-Earth team-ups that didn't work as well, in my opinion. As I said earlier, it felt more like a New Genesis Apocalypse story that happened to involve, per necessity, some Justice Leaguers and Justice Society members kind of thrown in there. It follows some of the classic conventions of these team-ups. It involves a few characters from each squad splitting off into smaller groups and going off on submissions. With one Justice League member, one Justice Society member, and one New Genesis person. Mr. Miracle, Oberon, etc., going off in different directions. That's classic, part of the classic format of these team ups. And there had to be some villains as lackeys from one of the two Earths. So we got the Three Stooges from Earth 2 here, helping out Darkseid.
that was for me one of the most bizarre, and most fun aspects of this story,
Yes.
though. That really
But also
what
one
is
of the most
going on
boring.
here?
Yeah, when it came out that Darkseid needed, I think there's some exposition in there. Darkseid needed these three. And I'm like, those three, really? That's what you needed?
One other observation that struck me as I was reading this, it made me think back to the Justice League movie and how I was looking forward to seeing them realize Darkseid on screen and how they were going to do that, which we're probably never going to see now, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Hopefully it would have been better than the realization of Steppenwolf on screen.
I
which
100% agree.
Ugh.
Because that's my bigger problem with the
Because
movie
they were
was
clearly
how they
built, they were
portrayed
built
Steppenwolf.
towards all of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
without question,
Yep.
yeah.
I had a big problem with how they portrayed the mother boxes and portrayed Steppenwolf. The rest of the movie I like, but ugh.
Crappy CGI and
Yep.
generic villain dialogue.
yeah,
Steppenwolf is not the greatest of Kirby's creations, but he still deserved better than that.
yeah.
Let's just go back to our review of the Justice League movie.
Yep,
Was
for
that-
more details.
Yeah, was that 2 years ago that came out?
2017.
17,
I think.
okay.
I think it was, yeah. And then the other thing was, that's fitting befitting a JLA JSA team up, but less befitting, say, a New Gods story, was Darkseid's ultimate plan to transport Apocalypse into Earth 2's universe.
Right.
For some reason, it needed to go into that universe exactly where Earth 2 was to destroy it.
Yeah.
And he had, for some cockamamie reason, Darkseid thought that that was a better place for him to use as a staging ground. But then Isaiah Highfather came in and said, but he's deluded because there are Darkseid apparently thought that he'd be free of the influence of gods, old or new, in Earth 2. Never mind that Earth 2 was more likely to have characters with powers from gods and magical beings than in Earth 1's universe.
Yeah.
So Highfather set the score straight there when he said Darkseid was deluded because wherever there are men, there are gods. I mean, right from the very first page of the story almost, Earth 2 Wonder Woman says, this place seems familiar to me.
Sure.
That's because she's so close to her divine heritage.
And doesn't she mention the one God that is unknown at some point?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
As a practicing Christian, I kind of appreciated Conway slipping that in there, too.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was really that apropos of Wonder Woman, who is very much a worshiper of the gods and especially goddesses of Olympus, that she would make reference
She's
to
acknowledging that power.
the monotheistic deity above all.
Yeah.
And they also mentioned the source.
Yes, which is
That's all Kirby.
possibly
stuff.
one of the greatest Kirby concepts from the Fourth World, and it's one that was probably used the most often in his wake by other creators.
And may have influenced George Lucas for all we know.
The source, the force. I think we've remarked on that before. It's entirely possible. But yeah, the idea of Darkseid thinking that he needed to destroy Earth 2 for some reason was kind of out of left field. But it's something that Conway probably felt he needed to do just to create stakes for one or the other of the universes that these heroes were from. But yeah, it's really more Conway riffing on the stuff he'd already done with the New Gods.
So, Murd, I'm ignorant here. Did Conway work on The Return of the New Gods, that series from the 70s? Is that what you're referring to? Okay, which I've never read.
Yep, with Don Newton.
Okay.
And it looks like the ending was a little bit abrupt.
I felt it was very... I was like, whoa, it's over?
Yeah.
that
All of a
struck
sudden,
me.
Metric comes up. Okay, it's over. We're good.
Yeah, Darkseid is rendered dead again, like on the third panel of the last page, and 3 panels later, suddenly, poof, everybody's gone, and Orion's just left standing there alone. We don't even really get to see the JLA and JSA say a proper farewell.
No, which I love when they...
In one panel, Firestorm and Power Girl, and I really did enjoy the chemistry between those two.
That was fun.
Throughout the story. They're talking amongst each other, and Firestorm saying what the reader is thinking. So that's it. It's all over. And Metron says, I think we've all had we've had all the excitement we can endure, Power Girl. And then... one panel later, suddenly everybody's gone and the story's over. But we're left with the captions, but you're wrong, it isn't over. Now we have a world to rebuild, if we can. But that's another story, and this one has reached the end.
Yeah.
And the implication seems to be that Conway thought he'd be going back to do more with these characters afterwards. And I don't know that he did. It might have been like a one-off story somewhere along the way. He certainly didn't get another Return of the New Gods series to work with.
Nothing as grand as what it sounded like that was leading into.
Well, I'm really glad we read this.
Yeah.
And I'm so thrilled that I didn't know that none of us had read it before, so that only adds to the discussion.
It is an interesting moment in it's an intersection point in the history of the Fourth World and the JLA JSA series of team-ups. And it's an interesting moment in early 80s DC history.
Sure.
Yeah, and I chose it, A, because I love Shane, but also, B, I always love the covers of especially 185. I always found the covers so compelling, and I love New Gods, Darkseid. I've never read these. Let's read these.
You know who drew those covers?
Dazzle me, sir.
Well, part 1 and part 3. Part 2 was Perez.
Right.
But the number 183 and 185 were drawn by Jim Starlin.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
Of course.
Yes,
That especially makes sense with 185 as I look at it again. Murd, I should have caught that. Well done.
Master of the cosmic saga that he is.
Yes, well done, Murd.
Yes, and who would go on to do quite a bit more with the New Gods much later.
I'm also thinking of, did you guys read the Walt Simonson Orion series from I think it was the 2000s?
No.
I think I might have bought the first issue, but beyond that...
Time bubble.
No,
I think we're past that.
We're past that point in the time bubble, I believe.
I remember enjoying that, although I haven't read it in many years. But
it's a time bubble. You can go now.
I don't think I can retrace the time bubble's own trajectory. That would
throw it off whack.
Yeah, that would rip a hole, I think. And
We don't want any holes.
no. Holes are bad.
Murd, I know it's always at your own pace, of course, but I always look forward to the next time bubble.
It's
They're a delight.
It will come eventually, Chris.
Tremendous.
I would have liked it to have been several months ago, but
Oh, you've been doing a lot of crisis stuff. lately,
time
so-
got away from me. Yes, it's true, and I really only have time to focus on one spin-off at a time.
Any other comments on this, gentlemen?
No, I'm glad we read it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not the strongest JLA JSA crossover in history, but it's
It was still fun.
it's worthy for its unusual nature.
Absolutely.
And it's also the first ever Perez art on Justice League.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't realized this until I did a little background for this episode, but that entire body of work on JLA in the early 80s apparently consisted of 10 issues.
Yep.
And this
I
was the
was
first.
Shocked how small that his run was on it.
Yeah.
I thought there was much more than that.
Yeah, me too. I thought it went on for a year or two, but
Yeah.
no, just a couple of sporadic arcs. There was this one. There was that Secret Society of Supervillains story in like the early 190 issues, and issue 200. And I think that was
Yep.
that was the extent of it.
Done.
Well, you can look forward to more micro spotlights down the road. I have some Spider-Man arcs I want us to focus on. The clay tablet. So,
More Conway goodness.
yes. Actually, that's
that's still Stan Lee,
that's
isn't
Stan
it?
Lee.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I have some Conway stuff I want to focus on as well. So, and I encourage you, my brothers, to also come up with your own arcs you'd like to look at in this new format. So, all right.
Okay, and
Cool.
of course, those of you listening at home can think of suggestions.
Yes.
Those are always welcome.
Yeah.
All righty.
Okay. Shall we
Righty, Rooney.
call an end to it?
Indeed.
Absolutely.
All right, here we go.
Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com to send an email. The address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com. Let us know your suggestions or what you thought of this micro spotlight. And follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Thanks to everyone who contributes to the episode and sends us well wishes. We appreciate it. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it, going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything the geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, comic geeks speak, comic geeks speak, comic geeks speak, comic geeks speak, comic geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes.